Hello and welcome to finally trying together on camera the Divine Bronze collection from McGrath Labs. That surely took a sweet time to arrive. It's also been a very long-awaited collection. I think ever since she released her blushes 2 years ago, we have been begging her to release bronzers, and I'm sure these just have been in the works for a really long time. Probably due to delays caused by the COVID pandemic. I'm going to try to keep the introductory words strictly to a minimum because I've talked already so much about this collection in previous videos, so I can link for you the video where I talked about my thoughts on the collection as a whole. I'm going to also skip on the mandatory shipping rant because I've already ranted about pets shipping on a few occasions in my previous videos. I'm just going to summarize my thoughts. I was quite pleased with the collection because I think it's again a beautiful spring collection, just like the blush collection. It includes a quad that is still on its way to me because it was shipped a little bit later. Personally, I'm quite positive about the 8 shades that have been released. I think there is a fair amount of depths and undertones in the whole collection for everyone to be able to pick and choose something. As a woman of color and a makeup artist, like an absolutely iconic makeup artist, I'm sure that if anyone knows how to make bronzers also for deep skin tones, it would be Pat McGrath. So with that, I want to talk about the shades that I picked out, because I, unlike a lot of other people, did not pick one of the duos. I was actually really disappointed that she was just offering the duos that were shades after each other. And I understand, you know, the shades are meant for different people of different skin tones, going from fair to light medium to deep. And what I did was total insanity. I picked shades across the whole spectrum. So I have picked 3 shades that go from one of the fairest shades to literally the deepest shade in the range. When she released the blushes, I actually did something similar. I ordered different depths, and eventually I ended up ordering probably the brightest shade in that blush collection, which is the shade Electric Bloom. I'm not going to show it now for the sake of time, but you can look it up. Electric Bloom is an absolutely insane color. It does not look like anything that would fit my pale as skin. For reference, I just finished my Pat McGrath Labs foundation in the shade Light 5, which is a little tiny bit too light for me, but to be honest, not too far off from what I would be wearing. So probably I'm not much more than a Light 6 or a Light 7. Given how light my skin is, the fact that Electric Bloom works on me with a very light hand was pretty remarkable to me. And not only did it work on me, it was probably one of the most flattering shades in terms of an undertone. So that basically sparked my curiosity about the bronzers, because I sort of expected them to be in a similar formula, which is a formula that's very versatile. I like a versatile formula. These can be sheared out. The blushes, I mean, they can be built up, they blend out really easily, and in my opinion, they're some of the most long-lasting products that you're going to find on the market in terms of how long they stay on the skin. These are insane. Their longevity is out of the charts for me. Nothing really lasts on my skin, or very few products last on my skin the way that Pat McGrath Labs blushes do. So I'm going in with the hopes that these are going to be a similar formula. Now, unlike with the blushes, unfortunately there's only one bronzer in here that has pearl in it, and luckily I have that one as well. The rest are in her demi matte formula. Her demi matte formula is still a very flattering formula because it is not a flat matte. It has a little bit of a sheen to it, so that it can look natural and blend out very easily. I absolutely love the little cardboard packaging that comes with the bronzers, because I just absolutely love the little, I don't know, Greek god that's depicted over here. It literally makes you feel like a Greek goddess when you're applying these blushes. I'm going to have a really hard time parting with the outer packaging of these, but I'm going to, for now, I think, keep one and just display it somewhere. In terms of the outer packaging of the actual bronzers, they look exactly the same as the blushes. They're the same format, the same size. They also come with a little button here. If you have multiple of her blushes and bronzers and you're not good at memorizing where all of your different shades are located, you might need to get a label maker, because otherwise you will not be able to tell which shade is which. I have all of my blushes in a drawer here, and I sort of have put them in a sequence of their depth, so I know exactly if I pull out a shade from there, which shade it is, because they're always in the same order, so I always know which one I'm picking out. But that's just my strategy. I think a label maker is probably going to be the way to go here. Anyway, without further ado, let me show you the 3 bronzer shades that I picked out. I'm going to swatch them for you. I cannot wait to put them on my face. Today I'm going to try the 2 lighter shades, and tomorrow I'm going to come back and demo Bronze Mahogany. So this is going to be, well, it's not going to be a two-parter for you, but it is going to be a two-parter for me in terms of filming this. And I'm also going to do some comparison swatches to some of the like more relevant bronzers that I have in my collection. I have some beautiful bronzers in my collection that are relatively old. You can't get them, so nobody really cares. But the ones that are, I think, a bit more relevant, I will try to do comparison swatches for. So the 3 shades that I picked out, starting off with the lightest one. This is the shade Nude Honey. And the reason I picked out Nude Honey is because it was described as a neutral shade, probably meant for people of a lighter skin tone, and I would definitely agree with the description that this shade leans quite neutral. Next we have the shade Desert Glow, which is the only shade in the collection that has a bit more of a pearl, and the reason I chose this one is not only because of the pearl, but because I also wanted to have something that is a bit more of like a classic bronzer shade for my skin tone, so something that is not going to be so much of a bronzer, so contour slash bronzer, which would be the shade Nude Honey for me, but more of your classic like shade that sort of like warms up your complexion. So as you can see, I applied quite a bit, and it is quite a deep shade if you look at that against my skin tone. But like I said, I'm very curious how these shades sheer out if you apply them with a very light hand. And honestly, the opposite counts. I'm also very curious how far down you can go if you have a deeper skin tone, but you build them up. So I would actually be very curious to hear, if you know people of a darker skin tone, how low in the shades they were able to go by just building up the color. And the craziest shade that I picked out from the collection is the shade Bronze Mahogany, which is the deepest shade, which, as I mentioned, I picked up sort of for science to see whether I can use it as a light skin tone person, and also because I could not stop thinking about the undertones of this blush. I think there's just something so unique and like neutral, but at the same time a little bit red about the undertone of this, that I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I had to order it. So this is the shade Bronze Mahogany, which is just absolutely beautiful. And I've seen people of darker skin tones use it, and it looks really, really gorgeous on them. So this is applied with a very, very like heavy hand. I can try to show you a little bit what happens with this shade and this shade if you shear them out. But honestly, I think the best thing we can do now is start applying them on the face, because sometimes even what you see in terms of undertones here doesn't quite translate the same way on the face. So today I'm going to try the shades Nude Honey and Desert Glow, so that we can actually compare the undertones of these against each other, because supposedly they are quite different undertones, and also to be able to tell whether there's more yellow, more red, more orange in the tones of these bronzers. I have zoomed you in very slightly. I'm going to take my favorite bronzer brush, which is this one from the Hinoki set from Sonia G, and the first shade I'm going to apply is the shade Nude Honey. Like I said, actually I didn't say that here, I said that yesterday on Instagram. What strikes me quite a bit about these bronzers is that when you look at them in the pan, they look quite light, but when you apply them, I think they are deeper than what they look like in the pan. So I'm going to go in with a very light hand here, because I would rather be building this up than having to shear it out. You know, it's like adding salt to a soup. It's better to go in with a light hand than with a heavy hand. So I'm just going to stipple that here. Is this brush dry? Yes, it's dry. It's very inconvenient. I don't have my mirror in front of me, which I usually do. So let me do that first. So this is a very light first application, and from this application, honestly, this looks quite neutral to me. This is exactly the kind of bronzer shade that reminds me a lot of the Victoria Beckham bronzing brick in the shade 2. And maybe a little bit of the Hourglass diffused bronze light. So this shade I can definitely go in a little bit more heavy-handed with the brush, because obviously it is also the one that is meant for my skin tone. It is the second shade in the range. I think it's a beautiful like neutral shade. It's not too gray toned or grungy toned, as I like to call it. For example, the Charlotte Tilbury Fair shade in her Sunkissed bronzer formula I think has a little bit more grunge to it, because it has a bit more like those like greenish taupish tones. I think this one is quite just neutral toned. So here is the shade Nude Honey. Quite lovely, and as expected, very, very familiar in terms of formula. It basically applies and blends out like the blushes. And now let's go in with the shade Desert Glow. I'm going to be a little bit more careful here because this shade does pack quite the punch. So I'm going to take a little bit on my brush. I find very difficult demoing cheek products on my right cheek because the angle with my camera is a bit more awkward. Okay, I'm going to take just a tiny bit more. And you can see if I take a tiny bit more, it immediately builds quite the punch. But I can easily blend this out because the formula is very forgiving that way, and this brush is magical. And I've just washed it, so there's nothing to pollute there. And you can immediately tell, I think, that this is basically a warm bronzing shade on me. It is not too orange or not too red or yellow. I'm actually very curious what it looks most like in terms of my warmer bronzers. So on this side you've got the shade Desert Glow. I can clearly tell the difference in the undertones because for me this is just something that I can use to contour slash bronze on days when I want to wear something a little bit more neutral on my cheeks, and this is definitely warming up my complexion. Alright, so in terms of application of these two bronzers, that will be it. I'm going to apply my blush highlighter and I will be back to do some comparison swatches, and tomorrow we're going to do the demo of Bronze Mahogany. I am back. I have applied my blush and highlighter on both of my cheeks, and here are the two bronzers again with a full face of makeup. So far I really like both. Honestly, as a first impression, just to give you some, you know, superficial words about these bronzers, I tend to like fall in love with products more once I start using them more, and because I kind of know the formula of these and I'm hoping they're going to be really long lasting on the skin, I already have like a really positive feeling about them. But that's not to say that I don't have other beautiful bronzers in my collection, and that's not to say that these are so unique and they bring something new to the table. No, they're just bronzers, and if you are a fan of Pat McGrath and you have always had your heart set on having like a bronzer from her lineup, then this is your chance. But if you have other beautiful bronzers in your collection and you're wondering whether there's something very unique about the shades here, I think there are some unique shades, but honestly I think one of the most unique shades here would probably be this shade. But that's also because I've never really paid attention to the deeper shades of blushes in other people's collections. I just was extra attentive to this one because I love Pat McGrath, so don't take my word on for that one either. I think all of the shades in this collection are basically shades of bronzer we have seen before. And now let's proceed to the comparison swatches so that we can see how the new bronzers compare to some old existing favorites in our collections. Now I'm going to start off again with the shade Nude Honey over here, and the first comparison I'm going to make is with the bronzing brick here in the shade 2 from Victoria Beckham. Victoria Beckham wins with packaging for sure. And then I'm going to first apply the light shade and the deep shade from Victoria Beckham separately. And then I'm going to mix them up. This is going to barely show up because it is quite a light shade of bronzer, obviously. So as you can see, Nude Honey is deeper than the lighter shade in the Victoria Beckham bronzing brick bronzer thing, and this one is also a little bit pinker. This one is also a little bit more neutral. Like these two almost look a little bit more neutral compared to this one, which seems to have a little bit of almost warmer tones to it. And now I am going to mix the two shades from Victoria Beckham, which is actually how I usually wear that bronzer, and I'm going to apply that right here next to the one from Pat. To me this has slightly cooler, pinker tones compared to this, which almost leans a little bit warmer compared to this. So on my skin this pulls slightly warmer compared to this. But to be honest with you, when I apply the Victoria Beckham bronzer on my face, it looks equally neutral. Like this is not pulling warm at all when I actually put it on my cheeks. So now let's compare Nude Honey to the other two, like more cooler toned bronzers that I have in my collection. First, I'm going to swatch this one from Hourglass, which is the diffused bronze light, which really doesn't show up on my skin very well on a swatch, as you will see in a second. And the third swatch I'm going to do is compared to the shade Fair from the Sun-Kissed Glow Bronzer collection, the cream to powder formula that Charlotte Tilbury released last year. Okay, like I said, the Hourglass isn't going to show up, which is very interesting because when I put it on my face, it shows up just fine. So this is the shade Nude Honey. This is the Hourglass Diffused Bronze Light, which right now isn't showing up, but I think it is also, again, slightly pinker in tone almost compared to Nude Honey. And last we have the Charlotte Tilbury one, which, like I said, is a bit grungier. I feel like it has a bit more like those like yellowish, greenish taupe tones to it compared to Nude Honey, which is much more of a neutral nude bronzer. And I think that's pretty much all for the comparisons to Nude Honey. I don't think Nude Honey is the one that's similar to the Chanel Soleil Tan de Chanel, the original one, but I'm going to swatch them side by side. This one is for Alice, because I know Alice really wants to know whether this is similar to any of the shades in the Pat McGrath collection. This is not the one. This is obviously much more neutral compared to this. So let's go on to the shade Desert Glow, which I feel like might be much more similar to the shade from Chanel. I still have the swatch here of the bronzer from Chanel. And Desert Glow actually has a bit more red to it compared to the one from Chanel. The one from Chanel has this very unique and interesting like yellowy mustardy camel tones to it. This is probably the most similar out of the three that I have in my collection, but it is not as yellow toned as the one from Chanel. It pulls a little bit more copper red, neutral toned. I don't really know how else to describe the difference, but you can see they're not dupes of each other for sure. Now, a warmer shade that I would like to compare the shade from Pat McGrath is the shade 03 from Gucci. So this one here. I'm very curious how this one is going to compare to the shade from Pat, so I'm going to swatch that right here. Okay, so here you've got the shade from Gucci. These two are actually quite similar to each other. There's a slight difference in their undertone, but I don't know that on the face it would translate as much of a difference. So far these are the two that I think are the most similar to each other. Okay, let's compare to the warmer shade of bronzer that I have from Charlotte Tilbury. This is the shade 2 Medium. That I would like to compare to the shade from Pat. So this is the shade from Pat. Ooh, this one is also quite a bit more pigmented, so I have to really apply it with a light hand and shear it out so that it can truly compare. So here you've got the Gucci shade, the shade from Pat McGrath, Desert Glow, and the one from Charlotte Tilbury. I think these three are all quite similar to each other, but that was also honestly to be expected because all these three shades are what I consider to be my like warming up bronzing type of bronzers. Now let's also take along the shade Dune from Nabla, which is one of my favorite formulas out there. It's in their beautiful like skin bronzing formula. This one is, in terms of tone, actually I think more similar to Bronze Mahogany, because to me this has a bit more of those beautiful like neutral copperish tones to it, and I don't know whether that's coming across on camera, but this one is definitely a different tone compared to these. But I also honestly didn't expect them to be similar because I don't use the shade from Nabla as a like warming up bronzing shade. I use it more as the type of shade that has a bit more like copper red sunburned qualities, characteristics to it, if that makes any sense to you. I want to also compare to the shade Baked from Milk Makeup. So I am going to apply that right here. So this shade is also, I think, in the same color family group as these four guys. They're not all like exactly the same. If you swatch them out, I think on the face they're probably going to look quite similar to each other, but I feel like these are all belonging to the same like color family, with the one from Milk actually, yeah, leaning maybe a little bit more neutral than the other three, which are a bit more of like a warming up bronzing type shade. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know that I have anything that is quite like the shade Bronze Mahogany, because I don't usually buy the deepest shade in a bronzer collection, but I want to just compare the undertones. If I blend this shade out a little bit, just like apply it with a light hand, blend it out, and then compare it maybe to the Nabla one. Because even if you compare them like this in the pan, you can see that this one, even though it is lighter in tone, has somewhat like similar qualities in terms of the undertone. So let's see. So this is the one from Nabla, this is Bronze Mahogany. Now, Bronze Mahogany is just such a unique, different shade for my personal collection, because obviously I don't usually buy shades like this. And one that's just going to be for me, because it's an older limited edition collection, doesn't exist anymore, but this is my Too Faced Unicorn Tears bronzer, which this shade sort of reminded me of, and I love the shade from Too Faced, so I'm actually very curious how that's going to compare to Bronze Mahogany. So I'm going to apply that right here next to Bronze Mahogany. See, I feel like these two have like these more reddish coppery tones, with this one being more neutral though. So this is definitely a shade of bronzer that I have no idea how it's going to look on my face, because it wasn't really meant for my skin tone, but I'm very curious how this undertone is going to look on my skin once it's on the face. So in terms of comparison swatches, nothing's really quite like it, which is also logical, but I can't wait to see how it's going to translate on the face. We're going to try that in a second for you, tomorrow for me. Ta-da! It is a second later, and the moment of truth. I'm actually quite nervous about this. I'm going to take Bronze Mahogany, use the absolute lightest hand I can ever imagine. I'm just going to do bloop. Did I take any product? I don't know. Let's try. And I'm going to start applying this shade to see what happens, because I am very, very curious. Okay, I can already see if there's a bit of color. I'm going to dab just a tiny bit more, because I feel like there's not much going on. And I'm going to build this slightly up, first with a little bit of those movements. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to take whatever product is left off of my brush, and also whatever hairs are sticking out. And I'm going to blend what I applied, because I do not want to go overboard with this shade. First of all, I think I was able to apply it with a relatively light hand to an intensity that is not pure insanity on my skin tone. People won't look at me and think, what the hell was she thinking? Why is she wearing a bronzer that's 10 shades darker than her skin tone? I think this works. And the tone of this remains quite neutral, actually. I'm going to apply my other cheek and try to gather my thoughts here. I think it will be a while. I will not be able to tell you now exactly what I think about this bronzer. Alright, Bronze Mahogany for you on a very light skin tone. It works, but I don't know what I think about it just yet. I'm curious what you think about it, but I think I will have to use it for a little bit, see how it fits with my blushes and that kind of thing, with what kind of looks I will enjoy doing it, before I can really have a fully formed opinion on it. So this shade will be coming back in a monthly roundup and empties video, where I will talk a little bit more about what I ended up thinking about this bronzer on myself, on a light skin tone. The other two, there's no question. I really like those. Those are like typical bronzery shades for me. One is a bit more of a contour slash bronzer. The other one is a typical bronzer shade. As you also saw from the comparison swatches, it was very similar to a bunch of the other like bronzy type bronzers that I have in my collection. So I don't know that there's anything new to report there. I wore them all day yesterday. They lasted really well. What I really like about the formula of these is that they also melt with your skin. Towards the end of the day, they just look one with your skin. For the outro part, we've been joined by a very sad Nicola. He was downstairs crying because he really misses his Oma, aka grandma. So I had to go and take him to console him a bit. But that means you're going to have to put up with him for the outro portion of this video. So what do I think about the bronzers? Nicola, even stil zijn. Overall, there is really nothing more to say about the bronzers at the moment. I quite like them. I'm very curious how they're going to fit into my daytime routine. I think the Nude Honey shade and Desert Glow are definitely going to find their place very, very easily. Bronze Mahogany remains a question mark, TBD. I don't know how I feel about that shade yet. Obviously, it was not meant for me. I think the message here was that every shade that I bought, regardless of where on the spectrum it was, I could make it work because of how versatile this formula is. But it remains... I'm sorry. But it remains to be seen. I will definitely update you on how I feel about this shade as soon as I know. I think that is pretty much all for now. If you have any questions or you would like to see additional comparison swatches or you would like to see anything else compared in terms of these bronzers, then please do let me know. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to come back next week as soon as the quad arrives because it is on its way, theoretically, allegedly. But I still haven't received any notification from DHL, so I don't know when it's coming. It's probably coming next week and we're going to demo it as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching as usual and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
Bye!